Is it okay to leave the United States and re-enter as a foreign national? That is the question that I and my immigration lawyer colleagues across the country are answering on a daily basis, probably dozens of times a day. And unfortunately, the answer is A, it depends, and B, we don't know. So that's not helpful information. I know if you're trying to plan a trip for work or for spring break or to visit family, whatever the reason may be, but there are a lot of unknowns right now. But the most powerful thing I think that we can do is to be educated, know what our options are, and to take control where we can and be prepared. So we're going to break it down. Welcome to today's Live at Lunch. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. And today, as I said, we are talking about the question of, can I travel outside of the United States and re-enter safely? So as always, this information is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not legal advice. You must talk to your immigration lawyer before you make a decision about whether or not to travel. Every case is different. So as I said before, there really is not a clear answer in a lot of these situations. And first, let's talk about what the word safely. Can I safely leave the United States and come in? I'm not talking about physical safety here. I'm talking about, can I legally come back into the United States? What is the risk? What is the chance of not being readmitted to the United States? So there are a few different groups of people that we're talking about here, right? So one is non-immigrant visa holders, that is temporary visa holders. Another group is people who have the I-485 application pending. That's the application for adjustment of status in process, but not yet approved. There's green card holders, and then there are immigrant visa holders. So we're going to talk about each of these groups in turn. Again, none of this is legal advice. And every case is different. If you have questions, put them in the comments. I'm happy to answer questions as much as I can as I go along. And I have notes here that are falling off of my computer screen, so I'm going to take them off. But the first group is non-immigrant visa holders. Of course, number one, make sure that you have a valid passport, everybody, and make sure that you have a valid non-immigrant visa. If you do have to apply for a visa while you're overseas, know that the process could take longer than anticipated, and there's no guarantee that the visa will be approved. I don't say that to scare anyone, but that's kind of the reality. The world, it's always been like that, but that's the reality that we're in right now. So again, make sure that you have a valid passport. Make sure that that passport is going to be valid for more than 6 months before you enter the United States. If not, when you re-enter the United States with a valid visa, it's possible that CBP will, not possible, CBP will, sorry, I'm getting distracted by a question here. It's possible that CBP will limit your entry to the validity of your passport, and that's the law. That's what they're supposed to do. There's nothing you can do about that except then extend your non-immigrant visa, but make sure that you're paying attention to that. Green card, Manar has a question about green card holders. We're going to talk about that in just half a second. Don't let me forget that. Feel free, Manar, to remind me if I forget. So if you're non-immigrant visa holder, temporary visa holder, make sure you have a valid stamp in your passport. Be prepared to explain why you're entering the United States, where you're going, what you're going to be doing, and make sure that all of that is consistent with the information that is in your underlying petition, if you have an underlying petition. By that, I mean, if you hold an H-1B visa, you have a valid underlying petition. That means a set of documentation that your employer submitted to USCIS to be able to get the petition approved, and then you use that to get your visa approved. Anything that's been submitted before to the government, whether we're talking about USCIS, Department of State, make sure the information that you're giving when you speak is accurate and it's consistent with what has previously been given. Again, if you have questions about that, if something has changed, your job title has changed, your salary has changed, job duties have changed, have a conversation with your immigration attorney about that before you leave the United States. We are happy to answer those questions, meaning immigration attorneys in general. If you're our client, absolutely contact us. Let's have that conversation. I would rather have that conversation now and you be well prepared and confident than do something that could jeopardize your status in the future. Same thing, if you have employment changes while you're overseas, let's have that. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but if you have that happen, let's have that conversation. Like I said, if you have to apply for a visa, a non-immigrant visa while you're overseas, be prepared for delays. There are backlogs at some US consulates, not all. Every post has a different processing time. And of course, it depends on your specific situation. I would anticipate increased scrutiny of visa applications, both to apply for the visa and at the port of entry. And there was something else I was going to say. Oh, yes, the interview. So we have, over the past few years, enjoyed, a lot of people have been able to take advantage of the interview waiver process. That is less and less of an option. That status, that process changed recently, and it's entirely possible that you will be called in for an interview, even though you didn't have to have an interview previously. So know that you may have to go for an interview, and that could make the process take longer than you anticipate. One important note that's an overarching note, not specifically specific to the non-immigrant visa classification, but to everyone, there's been a lot of talk about a travel ban. The Trump administration implemented a travel ban in the first Trump administration in 2017. And there's been a lot of talk, I think it was a week before last, they said, oh, this travel ban is coming out. It was leaked, I think, by the New York Times, and it's coming out on March 21st. That has not happened. That does not mean that it will not happen, but there is no travel ban in place right now. That being said, there's a lot of stories, a lot of information out there about people being detained at the border, people not being let into the United States, people being questioned. So it is critically important that you are prepared, that you know what to expect, you know what your rights are, and that you have your immigration lawyer's contact information. And let us know that you're going to travel ahead of time. So let's move to the next group of applicants, or the next group, not applicants, but the next group of people who could potentially enter the United States or want to travel and re-enter the US. That is individuals with the adjustment of status pending. Again, talk to your immigration lawyer before you make travel plans. That's critically important. So aside from kind of the increased risk in travel, with these stories that we're hearing of people not being admitted or being detained or delayed, just in general, outside of kind of what's going on right now, you have to make sure you have permission to leave the United States if you have the I-485 pending and process. That's the green card application. If you travel, if you leave the United States and you don't have, in a lot of instances, if you don't have the advance parole document approved, your I-485 will be deemed abandoned and denied. And that's kind of operation of law. That's not at anybody's discretion. That's just how it is. There is an exception if you have a valid E or L1 visa. And so again, talk to your immigration attorney. There's specific requirements that have to be met for that particular situation. And again, please continue to post your questions. I know I have one from Menard that I'm getting to, but continue to post your questions and I'm happy to help. So if you have adjustment of status, make sure you have an approved advance parole, or that you are able to travel on a valid H or L visa and that you've met all the requirements. Have a conversation with your lawyer before you leave. But know that even if you apply to re-enter the United States with advance parole, it is not guaranteed that you will be readmitted to the United States. It has always been at the discretion of the officer at the port of entry. And it seems like right now they're exercising a lot of discretion, sometimes negatively. So just know that you are taking a risk if you leave the United States. Don't say that to scare you, but know that there's not a guarantee, never has been, that you would be readmitted even if you have a valid advance parole document. If you do travel with the I-485 pending, I always tell clients to make sure you have copies of all of your relevant documents, copies of your passports, copies of your I-485 receipt notices, your copies of your advance parole approval notices, copies. I tell clients to travel with copies of their birth certificates, marriage certificates, things like that. Again, talk to your immigration lawyer. So the third category of people that we're going to talk about is green card holders, meaning lawful permanent residents, legal permanent residents, people who have a green card. In general, I would say that travel outside the United States, I would like to say, I won't say this, I would like to say travel outside the United States is safe because you have a green card. However, we have heard so many stories through the news, and I have heard stories from other immigration attorneys of green card holders not being allowed to re-enter the United States. I don't have a lot of information about that right now. I know there are some instances where your ability to there are certain factors that could make your ability to re-enter the US harder or riskier to do. And we'll talk about those factors in just a minute. But there are a lot of kind of sensational news stories out there to kind of, attention grabbing headlines out there. Like a person who's had their green card for 10 years and they have been denied admission to the United States. I'm not saying that that was done correctly or incorrectly. I just don't have the facts. And there have been several different stories. There are situations where a person, if you're outside of the United States for longer than a year, yeah, you may not be readmitted to the United States. So I don't know what all the facts are, but in general, really the only group at this time that I'm saying, yes, it should be okay to travel, and even then I say should, is US citizens. So again, talk to your immigration attorney. This is not legal advice, but there is a risk even if you have a green card. So I talked a minute ago, and Menard, we'll get to your questions, is relevant to this group of people, I think is relevant to your question. And yes, this live is available. I'm actually going to put it probably in the email newsletter that we send out on the first Wednesday of the month. And it will be available indefinitely on the platforms where it's posted. So that's my personal LinkedIn page, our Southern Immigration Law Facebook page, and YouTube page as well. So it'll be there. It'll live there indefinitely. So green card holders, like I said, there are certain factors that make it riskier. One is if you're outside the United States for more than a year, that's going to be a problem. Okay. You will have abandoned your permanent residence. If you're outside for more than a year, there is discretion. If you remember when COVID happened, fortunately, the officers at the port of entry were forgiving. People were stuck outside the US for more than a year for reasons beyond their control because of COVID, because of travel restrictions or illness or whatever the case may be. And yes, they were let back in. So there is, potentially some discretion there. But in this environment, that discretion is going to, I think, veer towards the negative and not letting people back in. So if you know that you're going to be outside of the United States for more than 1 year at a time, or even for several months at a time, if you want to, again, let's have a conversation about it, get a strategy together. But if you know you're going to be outside the US for an extended period of time, you can file, if you are a permanent resident right now, you can apply for what's called a re-entry permit that will preserve your permanent residence, assuming it's approved, for a period of up to 2 years. So you have to explain, why you want the re-entry permit, why you're going overseas, that type of thing. But you can apply for that, and that should preserve your residence for at least 2 years. Assuming it's approved. You do have to be physically present in the United States to file for the reentry permit. It's possible to leave once it's filed. You may have to come to the US to take fingerprints. So I've actually had clients who are physically present when we file the reentry application. They leave the United States because they have a meeting overseas or, for whatever reason, have to leave the US, and then they come back in several weeks later for the fingerprints and then leave again. So it is possible. So the reentry permit is a possibility. If you have been outside the United States already for more than 1 year, I would have a conversation with an immigration lawyer to come up with a strategy there. The decisions being whether you try to re-enter and take a risk that you may be told that you have abandoned your permanent residence, potentially be placed in removal proceedings, or you can apply for what's called an SB1, which is a returning resident visa. There are pros and cons to both, and nothing is guaranteed, as you know. So have a conversation if you've been outside the US for more than 1 year. If you've been outside the US for more than 6 months, that can trigger questions about potentially, I can't say that word, potentially abandoning your permanent residence. They can look at admissibility issues if you have been outside the US for more than 6 months. Admissibility issues being things like the public charge, have you taken certain public benefits? They can look at criminal issues. They can look at health issues, that type of thing. So in general, there's going to be more scrutiny if you stay outside the US for more than 6 months. So Menard, let's look at your question. This question is, for green card holders just a bit under 2 years, I assume you mean that they've had their green card under 2 years, are there specific countries we should definitely not travel to? Are these specific cities or states, and more specifically airports, we shouldn't pass through? If we need to travel, what papers or anything else should we have with us? If we travel, how can we make sure to have a lawyer just in case to talk to them if something happens? Should we leave electronics and get burners? What are rights as green card holders? What increase? I think I can't see the rest of the question, but those are all wonderful questions. Let's talk about them one by one. So are there specific countries that you should not travel to? That is going to be at the discretion. There's nothing right now that says that in general, there's nothing right now that says that you're not permitted to travel to XYZ countries. There are certain countries that just in general I think you're going to have a really hard time traveling to. Contact me directly if you have questions about that. But there's nothing right now that says you cannot. Let me say this, that it's at the discretion of the officer. So if you go to certain countries, for example, if you go to certain countries, Iraq, Iran, certain countries, they're going to have questions. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but if they have certain questions, if you go to certain countries, yes, they could have questions. They could deny you entry because of national security concerns. So yes, that is absolutely a concern. And I'm not able to give specific, list specific countries or cities, airports here, but yes, that is a concern, absolutely. If you need to travel, what papers should you have with you? It depends on your immigration status, but if you are a green card holder, again, talk to your immigration attorney, but you should have things like your passport, of course, your valid passport, your valid green card. I would have, if you're a green card holder, that's really what you would need. And then have emergency contact information. So for a family member or friend that you could contact if there is a emergency situation, or if you're detained or not allowed back into the country, and have your immigration lawyer's contact information for sure. If you are anybody who's listening who is a client of Sumner Immigration Law, yes, you can contact us directly. Contact us and I'll give you the information that you can use to contact us, text us if you have any issues. Electronics. That's a great question. I'm going to put in the comment below this video a link to an ACLU guidance. It's a website, a link to a webpage from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, that has really great, I think, information about electronics and kind of what your rights are when you enter the United States. In general, the less information or the less data that you have available on you, the better. And yes, you may consider having burner phones and that type of thing, but check out that link that I'm going to put in the comments because I think that has really helpful information. Manar also asks, what are rights as green card holders? What increases chances of someone being detained? If we usually get questioned more, does that make us more at risk or marked? Yeah, I think if you usually get questioned, then you can probably continue to assume that you're going to continue to be questioned. There are any number of things that can make CBP more likely to ask a person questions, including the countries that they have visited, what their immigration history is, the use of certain public benefits previously, or other admissibility issues, even if it's not relevant and the person already has their green card and they haven't used those public benefits since then, or they've resolved whatever issues they are. If you have criminal issues, there are any number of reasons that a person can be questioned. And I think if you have a history of being questioned, you can continue to probably assume that you're going to continue to be questioned. And again, that ACLU article has a lot of information, I think, that will be helpful for that. There's also an AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association flyer that I am going to share as well. So let's move on. Lost my internet connection, so I'm not quite sure if anybody can hear me now or not. If you would put that in the comment section, that would be helpful. So just resuming this, or finishing up this this live, we talked about individuals. So we talked first about NIW or NIV holders, temporary visa holders. We talked about people with the pending I-485, green card holders, and we'll finish up with the individuals who are entering with the immigrant visa. So that is when you have applied for, thank you, Nano, for confirming that. That's when you've applied for an immigrant visa at the U.S. consulate overseas to be able to enter the U.S. as a permanent resident. so far, I think it depends on a number of factors for sure, but so far we haven't, knock on wood, we haven't seen a lot of problems there. But definitely make sure that you are able to, thank you, Minar, for confirming. Make sure that you are able to talk about, again, I don't think that you're being questioned a lot, but who knows? Make sure you're able to talk about who petitioned for you, where you're going, how you received your green card, meaning, again, who petitioned for you. If there's any change in the basis of your immigration sponsorship. So for example, if you had a family member sponsor you and they passed away, talk to an immigration attorney before you come into the country. Or if you had an employer sponsor you and there's been a change in your employment relationship or the terms of employment, talk to an immigration lawyer before you come in, because that can be problematic. So just in general, in conclusion, unfortunately, I don't have the answers to, nobody does, to is it safe to travel? Is it okay to go to XYZ country? Is it okay to re-enter on any number of different classifications? Unfortunately, we're kind of in the Wild West here. I know that that's not comforting and it's not helpful, but that's where we are right now. So I would say if you are not a US citizen already, a couple things. One, if you are a permanent resident of the United States, and if you have any interest in becoming a US citizen, that will, I feel much better with US citizens traveling rather than permanent residents. So that's something to consider. If you are a green card holder and if you're eligible for naturalization, that will make any number of things in life easier for you if you become a US citizen. And if you all are interested in a different, or a different live on that in the future, I'm happy to talk about what that process looks like. If you are if you have a non-immigrant visa, or if you have a green card or a green card in process, even if you have a green card, even if you are a lawful permanent resident of the United States, please talk to an immigration attorney before you travel. These things are changing overnight. It's possible that a travel ban would be implemented that would change a lot of what I have said already. So make sure that you talk with an immigration attorney. No immigration attorney is going to be able to say definitively, yes, you will be fine, because we can't control the actions of the government. So if you talk to somebody and they say that, they're lying to you, unfortunately. But what we can do is talk to you about the risks, the level of risks, the pros and cons, and traveling. And like I said, when I first started this, I think it's important to know, for everyone to know, if you're considering traveling, what the risks are, and to know what you can do to mitigate the risks, to lessen the risks, and what you can do to be prepared if you do have problems when you re-enter the US. So I hope that you have found this information helpful. I hope that you will share this video with a friend or a colleague. Make sure that you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss our next video. And I will be back for Live at Lunch next Tuesday at noon Eastern. Until then, my name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, serving clients around the United States and around the world with employment-based and family-based immigration matters. Until next time.